If you're looking for a new way to support Side Mission, check out Dubby.gg, an energy supplement company trying to make a difference. Make sure to use code SIDEMISSION for 15% off your order. Thank you, Dubby, for sponsoring this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome into the newest episode of Side Mission. I, like always, am your host, Rusty Ellis, joined by the boys, Kyle Lynch and Matt Beck. And today, to answer the never-ending question of, will Side Mission finish the Twisted Metal review series? Yes, we will. We're getting one episode closer every week. Not every week. That's a lie. Every few weeks, we're getting one episode closer. But good news, fellas. I want to brag on myself here a little bit. I did finally finish watching the series earlier today, as of recording this on Wednesday the 6th.
Let's go.
I'm very proud of myself for finishing it. I wish we could just review all 3 episodes in one sitting, but we're not going to do that. So here we go with episode 8, and we kind of talked about it, fellas, before we got on here. And I think that this was a solid episode as a whole. It gives us a little bit more insight to one of the factions, the Holy Men, that we saw earlier in the series, and earlier in the season, I should say. And I remember back when we were first introduced to them that we weren't given much insight to them, how they worked, what their interactions or what kind of their beliefs were. We weren't really given much insight, and I said that I hoped that we were given more, and boy, were we. And I can safely say I did not imagine that what we got about the Holy Men was what we would get, or what their beliefs were what we would get. But I think it's time to talk about it a little bit. So, Kyle, the Holy Men, which, based on some things I had seen on Twitter, a lot of people were concerned that they were just, at first, that they were just going to be your typical Christianity-based cult where, oh, Christianity bad, everything else good. Definitely not what the Holy Men are. Let's talk about it, Kyle, because I thought it was very interesting how they completely, I don't want to say flipped the script on kind of what the Holy Men shtick is, but I think that it's really interesting that they believe that they are the gods and that the females or the women that are involved in the cult are goddesses. It's a really interesting dynamic, Kyle.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, when they first talked about the Holy Men, like you said, immediately I thought, oh, there's going to be some preacher guys who are all about, doing this because, it's the second coming, or it's, the apocalypse, it's somehow religious related or whatever. And I do like that they completely flipped it, like you said. Now, the leader of the Holy Men, the preacher, I am not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name, because I don't know how. But I love him. He's a great voice actor. He does a lot of work in, a lot of animated stuff. He's been in Big Mouth, Invincible.
Was he also, Kyle, you've watched, was he also a side character in Parks and Rec?
He
I feel
was.
like I
He was the.
recognized him from that.
Yep, he was the cologne guy, the really douchey cologne guy in Parks and Rec.
Yes,
He.
yes.
Anytime he's in a show, I can pick out his voice. Like he just has one of those very distinct voices, and so when he came on screen, I said, "Ah, shit! I know what we're in for." And I will say that this show has not been afraid to get raunchy before. Never in my life did I hear. I thought that I would hear somebody say, "I'm gonna fuck this car." What was that? What was that whole scene? They're like, "You guys want me to fuck this car? Yeah! I'm gonna fuck this car!" And then John Doe got all jealous. He's like, "Oh, so you wanna fuck the car? I see. What in the hell was that? What in the fuck was that?" That was the most raunchy, just stupid shit. It was funny, though. Oh, man, that was so wild. That was so wacky.
I think that, I'm with you in that I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. That is a hard name to try to pronounce. But I think that every moment he was on screen, I was like, this is a character I need more of. And I hate that, spoiler alert, we're not going to get more of him in all likelihood. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we guess, the whole thing is we don't see a body, but...
True.
That's I will say that for something that happens later on in episode 10, early on, there's another body that we don't see, I don't believe, that I'm not willing to just write off in terms of another character death. But
Hmm.
unless I'm mistaken and I just wasn't paying attention earlier when I was watching, which is a very realistic possibility. But I loved every moment he was on screen. I thought he was hysterical, and specifically when he and John Doe fight, and the
Oh
whole
yeah,
thing of like him doing like cocaine and that making him like making him almost like superhero
like
esque.
Popeye with his spinach.
Like it was awesome. And I will say this: I feel like I say this once an episode when we talk about Twisted Metal. There was another joke. This is a complete 180. There's another joke involving cocaine that had me screaming, and I had to pause the episode because of it. It was when that random member of the Holy Men walks up to John Doe and Quiet when they're undercover, and he brings them those drinks. And they were like, Jack and he's like, oh, Jack and Coke, nothing beats a good Jack and Coke. And Quiet goes, what's the crunchy bits? He goes, that's the Coke. And that that was one of my favorite jokes. And again, that's a top five joke for me in the show. I thought that was hysterical. But I thought that the other like interesting thing is like so normally with cults like this, and I'm not saying anything as far as what I believe or what Christianity believes or what have you. Normally you see these religious based cults, the men are the leaders and the women are kind of the ones that defer. It was a really interesting dynamic that the men sure are the ones that go out and like do like the dirty work. They do like the grimy stuff. They go out and they hunt for supplies or they find gifts, so to speak, for the preacher. But when it comes to the dynamic back at the camp, they're not allowed to speak unless the goddesses tell them they can. And again, it's one of those where it's the whole dynamic was so weird and so funky that I don't know. It was like a bad car wreck. I almost couldn't look away. I was cringing, but I was fully invested into like learning more about this cult. So I do think that the way they did the Holy Men was really interesting. And that sounds like I'm saying it in a negative way. I don't really think I feel positive or negative about it. I feel like I'm kind of just squarely in the middle of, it's certainly intriguing, and I would certainly not mind seeing more of them. And a few of them do escape in the end, so that's an interesting side bit as well. Matt, haven't heard from you yet. And I know at this point it feels like we're probably like 8 or 9, 10 minutes into this episode, and we haven't heard you talk at all. We've heard you laugh a little bit. Um, there was some interesting character stuff between John Doe and Quiet in this episode as well, and I think that you kind of sense that Quiet at this point in the show is starting to question why the hell is this guy so attached to this car, and we do get a bit of backstory on that as well. We see kind of the remnants of John Doe waking up and him not really knowing where he is, who he is, why he is, where his parents are as a kid. We see that, and then he finds Evelyn, his car, and we kind of see again the beginning of that bond, so to say. I'm throwing heavy air quotes because I'm getting like My Strange Addiction vibes with the dude that was in love with his car. I'm getting that kind of vibe from this. But I feel like there was some good character stuff here, Matt.
Yeah, they did a great job kind of going into a little bit more depth and detail about John's attachment to Evelyn. And I thought, again, we talked about this last time. They don't really force a lot of flashbacks. This one did have a decent amount, but it was still, I think it still carried on the story, considering, the conclusion to this episode and what happens. So it was really good that they went back and they covered exactly what makes Evelyn so special to John. So when John was a kid, he basically was trying to reach for a peach, I believe, and he ends up falling into the bush below, and he ends up landing on Evelyn, which is covered in overgrowth, and there's no telling how long this car has been there. Um, you know, and that's basically how he finds Evelyn, and then we kind of go a little bit forward another flashback after we go back to present time, and John is basically being ambushed by what is it, cannibals?
I believe
And
so. Yeah.
what happens is, Evelyn has not been starting since John found it. Like he's tried, and to no avail. Like this car has just been here for far too long to start. Like there's absolutely no way. But he jumps into Evelyn after he's running from the cannibals, and he starts. Just some stroke of luck, he starts the car, and Evelyn starts, and he manages just to get away. So in his eyes, what he is seeing is that Evelyn saved him. Like Evelyn's not just a car. John doesn't have anything at this point. His parents are gone. Like he does, his whole family is gone, and all he has is Evelyn. And just when he was in his final moments, being chased by cannibals, you don't think you're gonna escape something like that? I know I can't. I can't run. So yeah, Evelyn starts and he manages to get away, and then that just kind of shows why he's so attached to Evelyn. Evelyn is the one thing he has. Evelyn saved his life, and there's just something about a boy in his car. Like it's a tale as old as time, and I think they did a really good job conveying all of that and why Quiet struggles so much to understand, especially because when we get to a certain point, John's going to make a decision and it's going to really affect Quiet.
Well, so here's kind of where my critique comes in, right? Like I understand, and I think that the episode does a solid job as a whole of kind of explaining that. Well, Quiet doesn't really understand it, and John Doe, he doesn't really. There's no real way for him to explain it, I guess. Well, I say that I'm about to contradict to that last part. I feel like if she didn't ask or didn't inquire about like why, it's just a. She says multiple times, it's just a fucking car. And I feel like if those lines don't exist, if she never asks about it, then I kind of understand why it's never explained to her. But she asks multiple times what his deal is, and John Doe really doesn't explain. And I feel like that's something you can explain to
Right,
somebody is,
right,
hey, when I was younger and when I was in need and this car that I was living out of it never started, all of a sudden when I needed it most, it started and it allowed me to stay alive and survive to make it to this day. I feel like you could explain that a little bit more in depth, but I feel like he could have explained that and you avoid kind of the conflict at the end of the episode where, John Doe loses to the preacher in that fight where, he challenges him to a face off or whatever it is, a showdown, whatever it is they call it in the show. I can't remember the exact term. I think it might have been just face off or showdown, but he loses to him and he gets put in this cage and Quiet, beats a dude's ass, takes a pretty good ass beating herself as well in the fight to, break him out and tells him like, hey, we've got another car, we can get out of here, we can continue the delivery and we can make it back in time to, to have your place in New San Francisco. And he is dead set on getting Evelyn out of there. And she ends up screaming at him and saying like, "Hey, you keep saying it's we, but there's no we. It's just a car. I've done whatever I can to help you, and you're not, you know." He essentially doesn't give a shit about it, is what Quiet is trying to say. Again, can't remember the exact line of dialogue, but here we are. Um, and again, this is a great opportunity for him to explain, and he just doesn't explain. And it just kind of the whole argument just wouldn't happen. And again, it feels like plot details that are left out for the sake of just that argument and for the sake of that moment, that movement of the plot. And for me, I feel like you could have avoided that with just him not being. It's the Last Jedi thing all over again. So much conflict in Star Wars: The Last Jedi could be avoided if characters just fucking communicated. That's that. It's like everybody's in a bad relationship that doesn't communicate. That's literally what the issue is here. Is that they're not communicating well with each other. So I will say, Kyle, I did not expect to be emotionally moved by a car exploding like I was Evelyn at the end of this episode. I did not expect that to actually have some kind of impact, but I think that says a lot about the show, the writing, and where we are at this point in the season, that they managed to make an inanimate object exploding an emotional moment.
Why these motherfuckers at Peacock got me over here crying over a car?
Over a car!
Bro, that was the saddest moment. Oh my, I was like, why am I actually upset? It's just a damn car. But you were right. They really made that an emotional moment, and I thought that was where some of that genius shone, like just peeked through, because the way that they set the whole scene, and also I feel like it had such heavy implications on the fact that John Doe went back, decided to abandon Quiet for nothing, because his car got blown up in the end. And man, I mean, it was a heavy scene. It's crazy because the only person that died was a vehicle, but I will say though that it was 100% done with purpose, and I won't spoil anything, but it wasn't in vain. I think that it was a good decision. Having seen the whole series, even though this was an original vehicle outside of the Twisted Metal universe, and it, had backstory with the character himself, I think that this really is a turning point for John Doe, where he's, sees that the only thing he has in this world is quiet now. He doesn't even have his car, and he just abandoned her. He's alone. He's completely alone right now. He has nothing. The holy men just took the preacher, who's all burnt his shit, and left. Quiet's gone. He's all by himself, and I gotta say, they did a good job in giving these characters some arc and really showing. If you go back and watch the first couple episodes, it's not even that they, hate each other. It's that they just don't care about anything or anybody but themselves. And here we are in episode 8. We're seeing a real, because you see immediately after the car blows up and John Doe's kind of, sitting there, you see the immediate regret on his face, and no words are spoken. And the feelings you feel, you can tell he feels like shit. He feels like he just fucked up. It was a great scene. I think that, the entire fight and the car explosion scene are what make this episode, because the rest of it was pretty raunchy. It was really just, raunchy jokes, but those two scenes I thought were incredible. Very, very well done.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, again, it all goes back to the whole argument of they managed to make a car exploding. They managed to turn Evelyn into a character by doing that. They managed to turn a car into a character of the show, which, I mean, obviously the car is the most important part of any of the Twisted Metal games, but that's really impressive from where the show started to where it is now. It's really impressive they're able to evoke that kind of feeling out of people watching it, out of an inanimate object, being blown up. So I do like that you kind of hinted at what we're going to see when we talk about episode 9, because obviously it was done with purpose and it wasn't done for nothing. But we're going to leave that for next episode. Matt, is there anything that we missed that you would like to wrap us up with?
I think one thing that I want to mention is how, how Quiet and John Doe separate in this episode again is, because, he's choosing Evelyn over her. And, I think that I like that we're starting to see more that, Quiet doesn't want to be alone anymore. She doesn't want to lose another partner, as, she put it. So I like the fact that we've got a little bit more insight on Quiet and that, just how much she has attached herself to John.
Yep. And I will tell you right now, I don't care if it's in present day or the post-apocalyptic future. There ain't nothing in this world that's getting me to separate from Stephanie Beatriz, if you know what I mean. There is nothing in this world. Anthony Mackie and John Doe are two different people, obviously, but John Doe's a fucking idiot for that, okay? It doesn't take him long in episode 9 to find her, and we'll talk more about that next week, but that's a fumbling of epic proportions right there. Him separating from her. Come on, man. But I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. So that'll do it for this episode of Side Mission. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Side Mission Pod. You can follow us on Facebook as well at Side Mission Podcast. For the boys, for Kyle, for Matt, I'm Rusty. Thanks for listening.